survival on phase 2, the right to develop to the fullest. We talk about physical harms. Second, we talk about psychological harms, how they cannot be reintegrated into the community. Finally, protection from harmful influences, abuse, and exploitation. This flies in the face of this. The child is defined categorically regardless of individual experience. Why? Like, I can't just tell you that the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child exists. I have to tell you why it's good. I'm going to do that, right? Law cannot devolve to individual identity politics. We cannot allow individual identity politics, such as experience, to necessarily define law across the board. It can be a factor in trials when we deal with, for example, individual situations. However, we have to make sure that law provides a standard across the board so that we can provide consistency. Because, Madam Speaker, the foundation of law, and I'll take you in a second, the foundation of law should be justice, and justice can only apply where law is consistently applied. We think they are necessarily unjust in war and in international law. Go.
If I have a right to survival, and there are not enough adults to defend me, and the only effective way I can ensure my survival and the survival of other people is to be organized into a militia for self-defense, don't I have a right to do that under my right to survival?
Right. Okay, first of all, you're ignoring the fact that I talked about self-defense and why you don't understand it. Second, we think that you have to necessarily show military effectivity. No. You have to show military effectivity in order to demonstrate that a child soldier is necessarily a just actor in the situation. We don't think that you have demonstrated that a child necessarily activates their community sense of self-defense, which is what a soldier does, as opposed to an individual sense of self-defense. No, a child as an individual actor, if somebody is raping that child as an individual actor, you have a right to shoot them. That child as an individual actor does not, however, have the right in international law, or like in morality in general, to be able to act in communal self-defense when that self-defense is offense if you don't understand it. No. Why does the international community have the right to make laws and standards such as these? Madam Speaker, nation-state boundaries matter less and less. Don't give me the excuse that things like rape or female genital mutilation might be culturally situated. That is unacceptable. Is the meaning for childhood up for debate? Perhaps. But is the right of a child to have life up for debate? No. And we have decided this as an international community. The child is defined as a child and protected as such because of limited capacity to consent, A, and B, limited experience. They have graduated, evolving capacities, right? International law has the right to provide unique protection to communities that are uniquely at risk, right? So when does the international community make laws? When there is moral consensus and when we wish to prohibit an act or motivate particular behavior. One, why does there have to be moral consensus? Why is there moral consensus under the status quo? Why do they ignore the fact that there's moral consensus? Because the law has to be some attachment between that which is right and the law itself. Because we are required to obey the law whether or not we know that that law exists. Otherwise, it's just some esoteric guessing game, right? If I don't know whether or not it's right to walk across the street, if that is not linked to any particular right or wrong, it's just a guess whether or not I should walk across the street, and therefore it becomes completely capricious. Moral consensus is when we see an inevitable action and still say unacceptable. What action are we prohibiting? Using a child as a means to an end. Why, even if in the world there exists child soldiers, even if in this world, this is the world that we live in, why as an international community are we going to stand up and say, you know what, that's okay. We're going to couch it under a bastardization of Western law of what it means to engage in self-defense, and we're going to use this as an excuse to once again harm these children, not only these individual children, but more children in the future. Because they train children, they glamorize this as something that is necessary and good for these communities. We don't buy that. The result of international law is not just to send a message, but it is a recognition that we as human beings cannot be divided by nation-state boundaries. That we respect life, we respect humanity, we want to protect those who are most in danger. If you believe, ladies and gentlemen, that human life is worth protecting, regardless of how long it might take us to do so, then you have to vote opposition.
The second proposition, Cambridge E. Career English.
Ladies and gentlemen, today's opposition believe that a child soldier is an unjust actor. But child soldiers exist anyway, and we believe that the role of international law should be to do whatever the best thing is for those children. And it has been our side today who have given you an actual comparative analysis of what they support with what we support to show you why renouncing this ban on child soldiers is the best thing for these children now and in the future. That's what I want to look at. So first of all, I'm going to look at the effect of our model on child soldiers during the conflict. And we have to ask the question, what is the extent of international interaction with child soldiers during the conflict at the moment? Because what Jack flagged in the POI, and something neither opposition team have been willing to engage on, is the fact that demonstrably the current ban on child soldiers has had absolutely no effect on the recruitment of these child soldiers in these countries. Why is that? Because firstly, we often have no jurisdiction at all in the places where this is occurring. For example, they talk about Russia. We don't, as an international community, have jurisdiction over Chechenian rebels who are recruiting these soldiers. In Sri Lanka, the international community doesn't have any jurisdiction, so they can say they support rights, but the fact that the international community is setting this law is not having any practical effect on the children in these places. And secondly, in the context of civil war, and Jack talked about this in terms of insurgencies and warring conflict, in places like Sierra Leone and like the Congo, the international community can't even stop the war in the first place, let alone stop a subgroup of people within that from being recruited for a particular group. So what does that show us? It shows us that that entire team can talk as much as they like about how much they care about these children. In reality, what they support does absolutely nothing to help them. But not only that, Jack spent the majority of his speech telling you why it's actually actively harmful to these children. What did he tell you? He told you, firstly, he established that the imperative to recruit child soldiers for insurgents and for governments is always going to exist because they need to recruit the children because there aren't enough adults in the populace and so on. And we had no response to that. But furthermore, what were the harms of this? The first one was, under their model, the groups recruiting these soldiers have the absolute incentive to try and stop children getting to the international community and telling the international community what's happened. So what do? They kill them at the end of their term serving for the army. That was ignored by the opposition benches. What else do? The second harm was that they're going to indoctrinate these children in the worst possible way so the children are not going to realise that a wrong's been done to them and they can bring that to the international community. Absolutely ignored by the opposition benches. And thirdly, and probably most importantly, the only actual presence the international community does have in these places is in terms of aid and refugee camps. And that's the practical, most effective thing the international community can do for these children is to give them food to survive, healthcare and so on through that aid present. Under their model, it is much more difficult for children to access those benefits. And once again, that was completely ignored by the opposition benches. But if you needed another active harm of their proposal, it's that rehabilitation becomes much harder. The opening opposition just asserted, well, integration's easier now because the international community says child soldiers are wrong. Well, no, we actually think, as Jack said, this increases ostracisation for these children because of the fact that under a situation where it's seen as a crime, they're seen as being complicit in that crime. And so, psychologically, for them, it is much more difficult for them to go back to their own communities when they've been complicit in something which they, in reality, had no choice about. I'll take the closing opposition.
Great, okay. So, your argument here seems to be that the ban has had no effects whatsoever. So, why would lifting this ban have any effect whatsoever?
Firstly, it would remove all of the harms I just spent a lot of time outlining. I want to move on to the next part, which is about post-conflict, because we think there's actually a lot to talk about here as well that the opposition have wanted to ignore. Because we had a little bit of mention at the end of some of the opening opposition about, well, after the war's over, we then go and hunt down the bad guys who did the recruiting, and maybe we can prosecute some of them, and that's probably quite a good thing. The first point to make is